Remember when Bring Me to Life was everywhere? Evanescence ruled the 2000s, dominating the charts and music scene, before Amy Lee just disappeared into thin air. Drama, tragedy, and band breakups. All this turned her dream into a nightmare. But where did she go? Is Evanescence gone for good? Stick around as I reveal the heartbreaking story behind the voice that defined an entire generation. The birth of Evanescence.
I really am. We've been working on it for a very long time, so it feels awesome to be releasing it very soon. Even just to have our first single out and being able to share that with the fans has been really cool. I do think this is a heavier album. It's hard to compare, kind of, but I mean, yes, I do. I think it's a heavier album. This is definitely more of a band, tight, kind of collaborative thing. You know, we worked on a lot of these songs as a group, just sitting in a circle, kind of like garage band style, playing the music. So the drums are a big element, the guitars are a big element, and all the instruments sort of work together like that. But it's still very dynamic, very Evanescence. There's the ups and the downs.
As you can see, we're sitting here on the tour bus, the Evanescence tour bus with Amy. How you doing?
Hi, good.
And Ben.
Hello.
Do you mind me shoving this very large microphone in your face like that?
Not at all.
You're not staying at five-star hotels and trashing the room before you leave.
Well, yeah.
Bottles of Cristal.
In your band, it's your close home, I think. You see, it seems to me that you are very good to each other and that you know each other for such a long time.
We have known each other for a very long time.
Evanescence wasn't your average industry band. It was a passion project, a creative creation fueled by emotion, talent, and ambition. It all started back in the 90s in Little Rock, Arkansas, when a teenage Amy Lee met guitarist Ben Moody at a youth camp. And trust me, while they had their differences, no one knew what they were about to create. Amy was a classically trained pianist and a fan of artists like Tori Amos and Bjork. She had a deep, somewhat ethereal quality to her music. Ben, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. He was drawn to much heavier alternative rock. At this point, you must be wondering, how did these two teenagers with polarizing styles bear each other? Well, their shared vision allowed them to realize that together, they could create a sound that was haunting yet aggressive, gothic yet mainstream. And that's exactly what they did. With literally no money to fuel their music, Amy and Ben self-released early EPs in the late 90s, slowly gaining underground traction. And the reason I say underground traction is because they were far from blowing up. Sure, a couple of hundred people knew them around town, and their most exciting night would be jamming to their songs inside a bar. And that's when we got Bring Me to Life, the song that changed everything. Believe it or not, it was featured on the Daredevil soundtrack in 2003, and that's when things really exploded.
How can you see into my eyes now?
The song became the anthem for an entire generation. It had everything. Amy's powerful, haunting, and sorrowful vocals, Ben's gripping guitar work, and even a rap rock feature that took over the radio. But while the world was falling in love with Evanescence, behind the scenes, things were already beginning to crack. And I'll get into that in a bit. But first, let's talk about Fallen, the album that changed everything.
Your face, it haunts my ones. Now I will tell you what I've done for you.
For all my younger audiences, prepare to be blown away. And for those of you who've been around to see the rise of Evanescence, this is gonna take you back in time. Fallen, ladies and gentlemen, a cultural reset. Trust me when I tell you this. When Amy and Ben dropped this back in 2003, it took over the scene. And while it wasn't everyone's cup of tea, Fallen was much more than just another rock album. It was a true masterpiece that connected with people who felt lost, broken, or misunderstood. I mean, don't even get me started about songs like My Immortal, Going Under, and Everybody's Fool. Catchy? Not even close. Like I said before, these were anthems that were deeply personal. Behind it all was Amy's raw emotions that almost made it seem as if she was bleeding her pain into every single word of the songs. And rightly so. It's not like she had an easy life.
I went through some pretty dramatic, tragic things as a child. Like when I was very young, I feel like I kind of lost some of my youth a long time ago. So I've always sort of felt older than I am.
Amy was just 6 years old when she lost her younger sister Bonnie Lee. who was 3 at the time she passed away because of an unknown illness. Just think about that for a second. A 6-year-old in the school playground when she just found out her younger sister had passed. That's perhaps one of the saddest and most traumatic things ever. And in case you were wondering where all that pain came from, this was it. But yeah, the album dominated the music landscape, selling over 17 million copies worldwide, along with scoring 2 Grammys. And at the center of it all was none other than the legendary Amy Lee, who back then became one of the most powerful female voices in rock. But remember when I was telling you how things were already starting to crack? Well, Ben Moody, co-founder of the band, wasn't really happy with how things were going. And while no one knows the exact reason behind the band's breakup, creative differences, personal clashes, and growing tensions were probably it. But the real shocker was how he left Amy hanging. Ben randomly quit in the middle of the European tour. Yep, you heard that right. In the middle of a tour. And the worst part is how he left without a single warning or explanation. Amy was devastated. She had just lost the music to her songs. Whether you like it or not, Ben was a skilled musician, and a lot of that heavy gothic touch came from him. But interestingly enough, in an interview years later, Amy admitted that while Ben's departure was abrupt and chaotic, it was actually necessary. Things between them had taken a turn for the worst, and the band became toxic, with the creative process bearing the brunt. On a side note, a lot of fans believe Ben was interested in going mainstream, while Amy wanted to explore creativity and stick to a generally less mainstream style of fame. Plus, you have to realize how both of them were so young at the time when they achieved such massive success. But yeah, it makes sense, because Moody eventually went on to work with stars like Avril Lavigne, Kelly Clarkson, and Lindsay Lohan, clearly wanting to go all out on that pop gothic rock stardom. Oh, and did you know he even tried to replicate the mainstream success of Fallen with We Are the Fallen? I'll let you be the judge of whether he actually did. Anyway, back to what was happening. At that point in time, the majority of fans thought Evanescence was finished. Or should I say Amy Lee was finished. But this is Amy Lee we're talking about, and she wasn't about to give up. Rebuilding and the Open Door. With Moody now out of the picture, our star girl took full control of Evanescence. She brought in some new faces, including the likes of Terry Balsamo, and together they released The Open Door in 2006. The verdict? Amy didn't need Moody to create magic. The album was darker, more experimental, with sounds like Lithium and Call Me When You're Sober blowing up big time. And like the previous one, this one also sold in the 7 figures and introduced Amy to a brand new audience, adding millions to her fan base. As much as I hate to say this, success didn't come without a cost, and poor Amy found herself in the same exact position. Terry Balsamo suffered a stroke, which severely affected his ability to play the guitar. But that wasn't all. Tensions within the band continued to brew, with drummer Rocky Gray and guitarist John LeCompte eventually hanging up the gloves. The reason? Any guesses? Again, creative differences with a lot of financial frustrations. And look, I'm gonna be honest here. I get the fact that it happened once, but twice? Clearly there's something up with Amy, right? Well, it's only negative if you look at it that way, because for the fans, it was obvious Evanescence wasn't a band. It was Amy Lee's vision, and the band members, whoever remained, were either on board or gone. But if one thing was certain, it was that no one would be bigger than Lee. But if you remember watching her interviews in the mid-2000s, remember how everything was about her and Terry? That's literally all she said. Whenever an interviewer asked her about a song or lyric, she'd respond with Terry and I, giving absolutely zero recognition to the rest of the band members. And maybe that's what ultimately got to them. But whatever it was, it's not like it wasn't evident. If you remember watching them perform on stage back in 2006, you know for a fact that the energy was extremely negative. Rocky and LeCompte clearly didn't want to be there. But yeah, to sum it up, I think the rebuilding process was really successful, especially because Amy stuck to her gut and chose to continue embracing the quirkier and darker parts of Evanescence. And just when you thought things were about to finally clear out for her, Lee decided to take on a new battle. A legal one to be precise. Amy Lee versus Wind Up Records. The angelic vocalist just isn't cut out for a break. In the aftermath of their 2012 world tour, Evanescence announced they needed a break to reflect on something that had just happened. The fans were confused and couldn't put their finger on what it was. It was only after everyone found out that there was some tension with their longtime label, Wind Up Records. It happened sometime in October 2013, when Wind Up Records sold its catalog, including Evanescence's master recordings, to the Bicycle Music Company. On January 3, 2013, Amy Lee took Wind Up to court, alleging that the label had nearly driven the band to ruins by replacing experienced promoters with incompetent ones. And that's not all. They also failed to pay a staggering $1.5 million in royalties. During this time, Amy couldn't really focus on her music, but it surely helped her as she ended up winning. For the first time in 13 years, I'm a free and independent artist. Alright, so now it's finally time for some good music, right? Well, Amy did step back into the scene and drop some solid hits, but they weren't anywhere near her originals. She explored other artistic avenues as well, along with releasing solo music, scoring films, and even dipping into children's music. Amy Lee and children's music? Sounds odd, right? But at the same time, fans were still wondering this entire time. Was Evanescence over for good? For good, maybe not. But for the time being, yes. Another tragedy.
It was a real struggle. It was really hard to watch and hard to know what to do, and we were all really worried, what was going to happen, and was he going to be okay? Was he ever going to be back in school again? It was really scary.
Just a couple of years later, Amy endured yet another loss. This time, her younger brother Robbie, who passed away at just 24 years old, following a lifelong battle with severe epilepsy. She described Robbie as one of my best friends in life, one of my favorite people on earth. But this devastating event completely broke her down, to the point that it completely transformed her creative process. Remember The Bitter Truth? That record had Robbie all over it. But want to know the real reason why she's such a big star? Amy channeled her emotions into her art, as a confronting personal pain actually ended up fueling her creativity, leading to some of her most authentic work ever. And in a way, when you think about it, she's pretty much honoring her siblings' memories, and at the same time, her healing journey through her deeply emotional songs. That's probably the reason why she made such a strong comeback. Synthesis and The Bitter Truth. It's 2018, and Evanescence has almost disappeared. Fans are still stuck listening to old-time classics, when all of a sudden, Amy makes the most unexpected return ever with Synthesis. It was a reimagined version of their greatest hits, with orchestral and electronic elements. And I know what you're thinking. That isn't really a full comeback. Well, you're right, it wasn't. But it was a sign that Evanescence isn't dead. It's actually evolving. She also scored big with the critics, as they praised her for her bold approach, calling it her most ambitious project to date. And then we have the journey to The Bitter Truth. After Amy confirmed plans for a new studio album, the band entered the studio in January 2020 with producer Nick Raskulinecz. They had just one goal in mind: craft an album so perfect that it's both authentic and reflective of their personal experiences. The timeline had to eventually be altered because of COVID, but they still ended up releasing in March, with The Bitter Truth emerging as one of the most raw and emotional records ever, going deep into the themes of loss, grief, and resilience. And I won't lie, while it wasn't for everyone, Amy described it as one of the most honest albums she's ever written. I mean, you didn't really have to tell us that. It was pretty obvious, in a good way, of course. But yeah, the release of The Bitter Truth was a huge game changer for Evanescence, as their return to music marked a new era. The legacy of Evanescence. To put things into perspective, I gotta say, Evanescence's influence on rock music is unforgettable. The fact that they were able to seamlessly blend gothic elements, classic influences, and hard rock to create a sound that resonated with millions back in the early 2000s is just incredible. At the front of it all was Amy Lee's unique presence and crazy vocal skills that pretty much gave life to this fusion. Believe it or not, Amy went on to inspire a whole generation of female artists who ventured into the rock genre, with the works of bands like Hailstorm and Within Temptation at the top of the list. And that's not just my opinion. These bands themselves have shared how Evanescence was a huge influence on their musical journeys. But it's deeper than all that. When you look at all the band went through, it's incredible they're still relevant. Breakups, lawsuits, personal vendettas. Amy Lee saw it all, and still went on to make one of the most iconic bands of the early 2000s. But now the question is, where is Amy Lee now? Well folks, she's still here. That I can say with surety. But she's not the same artist as she was before. While everyone remembers her as this wild, loud, and raw artist, Amy is now married to therapist Josh Hartzler and raising her son Jack. So yeah, she's no longer the dark, brooding teenager who sang My Immortal. But hey, she's still making music, still evolving, and most importantly, still her original self. Now she hinted back in 2023 that there might be more music to come. But as of right now, she's still busy working on different projects. Evanescence might not be the same band it was in 2003, but its essence still remains. And while the band has seen a ton of hardships and changing faces, don't be mistaken, Amy Lee is Evanescence. And as long as she's around, the music will never die. Anyway, that's it from my side, folks. This was it, Amy Lee's struggle. She never gave up, Despite going through toxic relationships, legal battles, industry struggles, and above all personal losses, all while creating some of the most powerful music of the 21st century. So yeah, in case you ever find yourself wondering where is Amy Lee now, the answer is simple. She's still here, still standing, and still winning.